Hi and welcome to episode 9 of the Average Gamer podcast. I'm Joe Chip, and with me tonight I have Sully from One Guy's Opinion and Grant from Over the Edge. And tonight we're going to be talking about game saves and game save mechanics, what makes a game a classic, and Sony's juggernaut. And the first thing we're going to be talking about is game save mechanics. So take it away, Grant.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I was just thinking recently about how different video games treat the save game mechanic, in terms of what freedoms or restrictions they put on the player. Because obviously you've got lots of different approaches to this. You've got some games which literally let you save anywhere. I think what made me think of it was I was playing Fallout 4 recently, and literally the game seems to want to save every couple of minutes. Even if you're just looking at a wall or not particularly doing anything, it's like, oh, I better save the game, because something interesting might happen. Yeah, right. But you've got that extreme where, you can literally save round every corner, I think is how some people like to refer to it. So, they abuse that system.
It's my kind of style.
Yeah, so that.
Yeah, me too.
So, if you're like partway through a mission, you can literally just like do these several incremental saves. And then, of course, you've got the opposite end where games like the Soul series basically only let you save at particular points, and they're normally like a mechanic. For instance, in the Dark Souls series, is you have to save at bonfires, or in Bloodborne you save in the Hunter's Dream area, and you have to earn the right to save in those sort of games. I think that's kind of the approach that they're taking, is that save shouldn't be abused. It's up to the player to unlock shortcuts and then actually earn the right to save that game, rather than have a system where they can save and potentially abuse the save mechanic by reducing the inherent danger in the suspense, because you're not, the possibility of you failing is reduced, I guess, because if you can just save all the times. So I wonder what you guys thought was the best way of or the best save system that you've encountered in a game, and do you think games have made it too easy for people or players to save, and it's taken away the kind of challenge or suspense in a game?
I definitely think they've obviously made it easier, and I think we've all probably gotten used to it as well. I've been playing Wolfenstein at the moment, which is, it's not challenging by any stretch of the imagination.
The New Order, the new one.
The New Order, the one that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it just follows a traditional save, or a now traditional save system where, you progress, 5 minutes, autosave, progress 5 minutes, autosave. And I'll find myself, I might get caught up and I'll die. And I'm like, oh my God, please let the autosave have caught me. Because I'm just lazy. I just want to keep plowing through the story. I don't want to have to repeat the previous section. And I think we've all just become accustomed to that. We don't want to have to backtrack or go out of our way or be challenged in that kind of sense with replaying through an area that we've already done. I think it's just, I'm gonna call it lazy. I'm not sure if that's the right way to coin it, but that's just my take on it anyway.
I quite like the checkpoint saves, but I think that they have to be done right, and there's two ways they can be done wrong. And the first one is what you just talked about, that it makes it too easy for you. The flip side of that is sometimes you'll get a checkpoint in the wrong place. So, for instance, you'll have a situation where you've got virtually no health, and then you're coming on a boss, and it's just literally saved just before then, and then you're buggered. So you've got no chance of winning that part of that game. So you have to go back and play that whole level again if you can. The other thing as well is, I don't know if you guys remember in the old days with something like Tomb Raider, you'd get the things like the unforeseen death or whatever, where you'd suddenly be walking along and then you just suddenly fall off a cliff.
All the time in Tomb Raider.
Yeah. So auto saves would have been quite helpful there,
Sorry, Joe. Just another little side note was, I think it's obviously, I think, genre specific depending on how they tackle a save state, and even probably further back in the day would be platform specific as well. Because I was having a conversation with a friend at work the other day about how he had a friend who had this theory regarding an arcade game that was ported to the Nintendo 64, and I think it was NBA or some kind of basketball game. And he used to play it in the arcades, And obviously the arcades are geared to, they're extremely challenging because they want your money, essentially. You know, they want to fail you and you offer them like a penny or something, you know, and you play again, you have another go. And he got it on Nintendo 64 like years later. And he said it was ported over, but the save system and the progression system, it never changed from what it was like in the arcades. And he actually ended up getting to this wall and point in the game, which he thought and believed was just unbeatable. Like, he just could not get past this level, and he'd repeat it dozens and dozens of times, and he couldn't beat this level. So it's just interesting to throw into contrast like the different progression systems and save states and all that between platforms and genres. But
I guess there's a few things that come to mind. I mean, one, you mentioning Wolfenstein was interesting because I don't know how far you are into the game, because you're saying it's not particularly challenging. I would say wait till the latter half of the game, because it gets more difficult, and you'll be. What I found with that game was early on I was thinking, oh, the checkpoint system in this game is generous.
Yeah, generous.
And yet in the latter half of the game I was thinking, why do I have to do this bloody section again? You know, because there's levels where they throw so many enemies at you. You're thinking, oh, I can just get to here, I can unlock that checkpoint. And you know how some games have where you hit this invisible kind of section. It's like Call of Duty. You hit this invisible part of the level and suddenly you've hit another checkpoint, but it's not obvious. You know, you've hit that particular point. And Wolfenstein's a bit like that. Another thing that came to mind was this idea that I read someone put this forward recently, which was some people haven't got much time to play games nowadays. So if you're going to give them a game where the save system is particularly punishing, then it kind of discounts them from being able to sort of take an active part in playing it.
Yeah, I won't play a game if I, you know, you were saying about Neo earlier on Discord. If I started playing Neo, I would stop and I wouldn't go back, because I'd just get fed up with it, because I simply haven't got the time to put into it.
Well, that's what I found with Dark Souls. Like, I think I started playing Dark Souls 3. That was my first. I had played a little bit of Bloodborne before that, but that was my first real step into a Dark Souls kind of series of games. And I actually found like everyone carries on about how hard the bosses are and how challenging the bosses are. And I remember I beat the first couple of bosses, and yes, they were challenging, but they were satisfying at the same time. But what I found the most annoying was I was just trying to go through, like, after this boss area, I was going through like this castle area, and there was like the skeletons and a couple of other demons and stuff like that. And I honestly don't know how far I was from a checkpoint or a bonfire, but I kept getting killed by the skeletons. And every single time I'd reset back to after that boss fight where it autosaves, and I'd have to go through this castle again, and the skeletons all placed exactly the same, nothing's changed.
Yeah, they're all reset, yeah.
And I just got fucking tired of running through this castle, trying to get out the other end, and like, I felt like I was grinding through it, and I don't know how far I was away, but they just kept chipping my health down slowly, and yes, each time I would progress further, but it felt like a rinse and repeat trial and error thing, and I was just like, no, I can't do this, I'm just over this.
It's a genre of game. People don't talk about it as a genre, but it is a genre of game, and it is called games for masochists. and basically, if you're a masochist, if you like to be punished, go and play those games, because I find them. One of my best mates is absolutely addicted to those kind of games. He thinks they're brilliant. I told you, Grant, about, you know, he platinumed Bloodborne, and he will be all over Neo. But for me, he loves it. He'll sit there and he'll play it all day when because he's a teacher. He has the summer off, and he'll kill all his back catalogue in the summer, and he will sit there all day and play something like Neo or something like Bloodborne. And I cannot do it. I remember trying. He got me into playing Ninja Gaiden some years ago.
My God!
I just got fed up of it. It's just tedium. It's because it's doing the same thing over and over and over again. And as I say, I know a lot of people love that in games, and it is challenging, and there is some, you do feel like you've achieved something when you get through it. But for me, it's just I just can't do it. It's like someone sticking pins in my eyes, to be honest.
Well, to be fair, I sit in somewhere between the two. I understand both points of view, because I like Bloodborne. I haven't played a lot of the Souls games, but what I would say in response to what you said, Sully, was the idea behind the Souls games is that you get a little bit further each time, because you learn the patterns of attacks, and also there's this idea you unlock shortcuts. So, You don't have to keep going. You don't have to actually fight all the enemies in the Souls games. If you're trying to get to an objective, you can run past them, and a lot of people forget that you don't actually, once you've unlocked the shortcuts, you don't actually have to fight everything. But the idea of fighting a lot of enemies is to learn their attack patterns. Sometimes you'll walk into a room in a Souls game, you'll get ambushed because that's part of what Joe calls their sadistic nature. People, they just like to just mess you up. But then the next time you go in there, you'll know that there's something there. You'll know there's something hiding behind the corner. Yeah. But I understand the pros and the cons of these sort of games. But one of the interesting things that it sort of raised was this idea that is the difficulty level of a game, and its save state, are they sort of interdependent? Because I think a game's difficulty can sometimes artificially prolong its length, when it's not otherwise a particularly long game. Because I've heard people talk about
I agree.
Neo being 80 hours long, and I think that's partly because it takes you so long to learn the mechanics of the bosses and defeating them.
It might a feature like autosave, and then how will that affect the game length?
It's that exactly. If there was an autosave, like it would change the nature of the game. I think it wouldn't be that sort of game if you could just like go around a corner and then save, like you could in Fallout, or it would almost be a totally different game altogether. I think, and I think you could argue that it might only be 30 hours of content in Neo, but it's actually going to take you 80 hours because you've got to learn how to defeat these enemies. I had a situation where I was playing the game where it took me 20 attempts to defeat the first boss, and the second boss came. I literally one-shotted in about 10 seconds, and I thought, this is a totally contrasting experience, It's like, and it might be partly because I've learned the mechanics of the game better, but it took me X amount of hours to get there, and that's partly because of the save system. But also it's this other big part of the game, which is learning how it works, and I'm just wondering if there's a happy medium in terms of saving games between these sort of two ideas, because there seems to be like one extreme idea in the Dark Souls series, and like Fallout is almost like the opposite end, isn't it? Save where you want.
If there is like a best of both worlds, like I completely understand Dark Souls and the reasoning behind how they handle their autosave systems, and I definitely agree with my experience with Dark Souls 3. I'd completely agree with the way you summed it up about, trial and error and learning. It's just not my thing. That's why I didn't like it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I don't know. There are games that do. I don't think we necessarily think about it these days. Like, I think if a game gets it right, we don't think about how the autosave system is being handled.
That's a good point, actually. We take it for granted, don't we? Because if you've got a checkpoint... most games have a checkpoint system. I'm just thinking of a game like The Last of Us. It's like you hit a checkpoint, you hit you hit sort of points where you progress the story, or...
Yeah, like it's based on the story. Yeah, see, that's the kind of checkpointing that I think I agree with and what I like, and it feels probably natural. Like, it's like completing a chapter of the book, and you can put your bookmark in, and then you put your book down, you go to sleep,
Yes.
I kind of agree with that kind of checkpointing.
I like that. Yeah.
Of course, the other thing in PC gaming, and I think the save anywhere thing comes more from PC gaming than console.
It does,
gaming.
Yeah.
I've been playing Black Mesa, which is the kind of remake of the original Half-Life, and you can save anywhere on that. But the flip side of that is that you can save anywhere, but if you get sucked into the game and you're playing along, you forget to save. And there are autosaves as well. Yeah. But you get through quite a long bit, you've not autosaved, it's not autosaved, and you've forgotten to save, and then you have to go right back along, because you've forgotten because you've been so engrossed in what you've been doing.
Absolutely.
So that can be quite frustrating as well. So you're never going to get a perfect save system, I don't think. And to sort of contradict what I said earlier, I think I've not played a lot of Bloodborne, but I actually thought the saves in Bloodborne were quite well done with, the pyres or other fires.
The lamps, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that no matter what they do with saves, there's always going to be an issue. And I remember... Do you remember the original Dead Rising? And I think the first save point, it may not have been the first save point, but you had to say, you went into the toilet and you had to save in the toilet. Which was quite amusing, but the problem is you go running through a whole horde of zombies to get to the toilet, and if you're a bit low on health, you can't get to the save point.
I just need to go to the loo. Get out of the way, zombies.
But yeah, going back to the save systems, about what you guys said about is there a perfect system? Yeah, I don't know if there is a perfect system, because every game is different and they want different things, and one system might be perfect for someone else, whereas not perfect for the other kind of gamer, you know. And I don't think there ever will be a perfect save system.
No, and I think probably that's not really the right question to ask, but I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said what is the right system for that particular game, you know. And I think, like you said, it only sticks out when it's either completely wrong or really unfair. So I think, you know, it's like what works best for that game, and if it works really well, like you say, you tend to not notice it, which is a good thing. It's like the referee in football. If he's having a good game, no one notices him. If he's making a load of mistakes, everyone's shouting at him.
Crucify him.
Yeah.
A good game save should be like a good controller system, a good control mechanism. You shouldn't notice it once you're playing.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Okay, well, thank you, Grant, for that one. And that's the end of the first part of this podcast, and we'll be moving on to the next one. So thanks for listening, and tune into the next bit. Okay, and welcome to the next part of the Average Gamer podcast. And the second part of this podcast is going to be what makes a game a classic. And that's me, so I will begin. And yeah, basically, I've been thinking about this a little bit lately, and I've been going through some of the old games that I've played, and I've been looking at the original Deus Ex, I've been looking at the original Doom, I've been looking at things like, I've been playing quite a bit of Black Mesa, which is a sort of recreation of Half-Life. And I've been thinking about various games that I consider classics. And then today I was thinking about, if you go right back into the depths of history, and you've got things like, I don't know, games like some of the arcade games like Defender, Space Invaders, even something like Tetris. And I remember back in the day, Asteroids. And these games are things that are stuck in my psyche. I don't know whether I would describe them as classics or not. So basically what I wanted to do is open it up to you guys and ask you, what do you think constitutes a classic game? Because I think it kind of varies from person to person, perhaps.
Is it, I guess, what defines it as a classic? Like, could you see a classic as a game that, no matter what its age was, is it something that hooked, you know, a huge group of people for, you know, ridiculous amounts of time? Like arcade experiences, like they're quite addictive, and, you know, seeing the points go up, blah, blah, blah. Or is it like a game within its genre that kind of redefined its genre, and that's why we remember it?
That's a good point, actually. But I think it's a very personal thing. I mean, for me, a classic, it conjures up sort of different ideas, because a classic video game is one that, for its time, was mechanically, sort of visually, sort of aesthetically, like something that came together incredibly well, and it resonated with you on maybe on an individual level. Because you mentioned Deus Ex, Joe. I have really strong memories of that game. I think for the time, and probably several years afterwards, that game is the very definition of a classic, because it actually changed, it actually created a new genre almost, because the kind of RPG stroke sort of first-person shooter hybrid hadn't really been done in the way Deus Ex did it, and it broke the mold really, and it did it in a way that was totally unique, and it basically set a trend where a lot of games were imitating it afterwards. But there comes a point,
including
though,
its own sequels.
Yeah, including its own sequels didn't know how to replicate the success of the first game. That was unfortunate.
Quite
really.
often the case.
And it's only really the last, it was when they almost rebooted it with Human Revolution and Mankind Divided that they sort of tried to hark back to the spirit of the original Deus Ex games. And I think they sort of got some of it right, but not all of it.
Unfortunately, the series is on hold now.
Is it? Oh dear.
Yeah,
that's a shame.
Last week, the studio, I can't remember the studio's name, who was working on the series, the last game came out, didn't do great sales-wise, had good reviews. I think they own it, but I think another studio works on it.
Oh yeah, you're right, I think.
But yeah, unfortunately, they had, I think, games, like another 10 years of games and story arcs planned out, but unfortunately, they haven't pulled the pin on it. They've just put it on hold, and they're working on other projects now. So
I'm not surprised, because I think the ending was very open. It was left deliberately very open of that game.
Yeah.
But so going back to what you were saying, I think a classic is a game you can go back to at any point and it will still be playable because it has those elements that made it sort of an incredibly good game. For instance, let's take Super Mario World. You know, you could look at Super Mario World now and go, well, the graphics are rubbish, but actually that game mechanically is pretty hard to beat. It's almost perfect for a platformer.
I was going to say, do you think that, like, obviously I mentioned a hook and you've mentioned mechanics and we've mentioned, you know, genres redefining themselves, but do you think nostalgia plays a big part in it as well? Because for me, like, I look at the original Halo, and obviously I was in my teens then, and obviously it redefined the FPS genre on console, but I look at it, you know, and it had that hook, but because of my age and all that, it's nostalgic for me as the same as what, you know, Super Mario World was as well. Do you think that plays a part in how we go, oh, it's a classic, that nostalgia impacts our decision as to whether or not we think it's a classic or not?
Well, I think, to be honest, the point I was trying to make was that if it's a classic, it will bypass any sense of nostalgia because you'll still be able to go back and play it and you won't be affected. Obviously, you're going to look at it and think, you know, in the context of what we've got today, the game doesn't look very good. But Deus Ex, for instance, I think that with the original game, there comes a point where once enough years have passed, you start to sort of see it slightly differently because you start to look at the things that are wrong with it, and there might be a point where some games no longer remain classics because too much advancement has been made in the kind of the video game industry for it to look, you know, as good as it once did, maybe in different ways.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
In that case, that a game could maintain itself as a classic, even though games have followed on that have done it better or whatever. And you know, I'm thinking if you look at things like film, there's films out there that are considered classic films, but, you know, they no way will they stand up in terms of visuals, the sound production, you know, the camera work of modern films. But there's things about them that inform those modern films. So, for instance, you know, if you look at something like the Battleship Potemkin, you look at the steps scene from the Untouchables, and any number of other films will have picked up from that scene and they'll have used that idea and gone with it and maybe done it better as well. But, you know, it's that film that laid down the groundwork for that. And I think that if you say, for instance, you look at something like Deus Ex, yes, it might date in some respects, but you look back at it and you think, well, that led to all these other games. Same with Halo. I think if you look at Halo, we've talked about this before, the control mechanism that it introduced didn't exist before that game. And now virtually every single first-person shooter and, you know, third-person shooters as well use a similar control mechanism. And so that game almost transcends its limitations because it's given us something that we wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise.
I think the point you make about films is really interesting, and I think films that date as opposed to films that don't date, and I think the difference between the two is that films that date are films that relied on something that was of the time in order to sort of present kind of I don't know, maybe the plot or the sort of ideas behind the movie were very tied to that particular period in history. That sort of film is going to date because that period is no longer with us. But films that are just, for instance, my favourite film is a very old film, Sunset Boulevard. It's a 1950s film. It's to me, that's just an incredibly well shot film, and it doesn't rely on any gimmicks, and it's purely about the story, is about the performance between the two main characters. And I think with Deus Ex, the reason why I think the original Deus Ex has aged is because it relied on things that were very much of the late 90s and early 2000s in its aesthetic. But in other ways, you're right, it was groundbreaking in the same way that Halo was. But I think the reason why Mario World, I think, for instance, hasn't aged as badly as something like Deus Ex is because Mario World's what makes it a good game is all in its mechanics. It's not in its graphics. So you see, Deus Ex's graphics have aged because they look crude polygons now. You know,
I think it's also the transition in technology as well, like with the 3D to 2D and the way we generate. But that's a little side note as well.
Yes, the 3D aspect is part of it. I mean, Mario's a 2D platformer at the end of the day, but if you gave it, for instance, to a 6 or 7-year-old who wasn't tainted by what computer game graphics are supposed to look like, they would pick it up and play it and understand it intuitively. They wouldn't sit there and go, "Oh, these graphics are rubbish," you know. But they might look at something like Deus Ex and go, "Oh, that looks a bit ugly."
Oh, definitely. No, I agree with that. I think you've summed it up well. It's a tough one to pull apart, though.
I mean, a classic for me is like a different. It's lots of different things. You know, it's like a personal thing.
Can I ask you something though, in relation to, you know, we talked about film a little bit. If you look at certain films, again, they've dated, but they would still be studied because they offer something to somebody studying film.
Yeah.
And so they've got something to offer above and beyond aesthetics, if you like. You know, you wouldn't necessarily watch them for pleasure anymore, but you would get something out of watching them. You would learn something about the process of filmmaking.
Yes, exactly.
Do you think that there are games that you could look at in that way that wouldn't necessarily be something you'd give to your mate and say, play that, it's still a great game, but you would give it to somebody who, you know, you said this the other week, if somebody wants to make games, go and play The Last of Us.
I was going to say, that's a perfect example. 10 years from now,
Absolutely.
you know, you'd give that, still give that to someone, you know, because it was groundbreaking storytelling wise.
Yeah, I mean, I played that again recently. The Last of Us is still a great game. It has not aged, as far as I'm concerned. You know, but
it will eventually. It will, in terms of the way it looks.
It will. But your point is very valid, I think, Joe. You know, it's like, you know, with regards to film, it's basically. You know, there are films that, you know, are really good examples of, you know, they have some technical aspect, or they have something that to a film student would be completely fascinating. In the same way that, because what they do is a fine example of, say, cinematography or editing or something like that. It's an aspect of the movie that is like almost as good as it gets in terms of.
Or even something as simple as the fact that most films will generally pan from left to right. You know, that's a convention. We're used to that because we've used to seeing it, and so at some point, films started laying down those conventions, and I think we're almost still in that stage at the moment with games. We haven't really got beyond that. We have to some degree.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's moving very fast. But I think to some degree, we're still laying down those things within gaming.
I think gaming is still very young. I think gaming is learning, like you say, how to be artistically creative. I mean, I going back to what you were saying, if I was saying to someone, "Oh, go and play this game," because they wanted to know about video games. I mean, some of the indie games out there, like the Beginner's Guide or the Stanley Parable, you know, are very clever at deconstructing games. They basically, they might not be classics, but they give you an understanding of what makes a good video game. Because the point they're trying to make is that, you know, a video game is many different elements, and a classic has to be something that resonates with you, not just something that's good mechanically, visually, or has good sound. You know, it has to say something to you. You know, whether it's like The Last of Us says something to me on a narrative level. It says something about the relationship between two people, like, or, you know, between Ellie and Joel. In the same way that for some people, Dark Souls might say something about how, you know, a game is a challenge or that they want to overcome. You know, it's like an obstacle, it's like a hurdle. You know, it's like that might make a classic for them, but it's a very personal thing, I think. Yeah, because there's no objectively someone can say, "Oh, Mario is a great game," but someone equally could turn around and say they hate it. You know, it's just like it's overrated or something.
In a way, wouldn't a classic be the game that would still be held up as a classic? Same way with a book or a TV program or a film or whatever it might be. The classic maybe is the thing that even transcends that in terms of, you know, you might yourself not like it.
Yeah.
You know, like for instance with me, I'm not generally a fan of classical music, say. But I can often appreciate the skill and, you know, the worth of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would a classic be a game that even though I may not personally like it, I can still look at it, or I might find flaws with it. I can still look at it and think that has some importance above and beyond it just being a entertainment, if you like.
I think it depends on your intelligence level, because you clearly get people that will openly slam a classic like The Last of Us and all that. They can't appreciate it as being a classic. They just think their personal opinion rules above all else. But
yeah, I mean,
but they're
I think you're right, Joe. I think you've hit it on the head. I think you're right.
I think it's a consensus thing, isn't it? I mean, a game might be a classic depending on how much of a consensus there is supporting it to be a classic. You're always going to get people, like Sully said, you're always going to get people that are contrarians because they want to hate something that's popular and good, and that's not a good enough reason to say something's not a classic game. But it's a good subject, yeah, because it speaks on lots of levels, I think.
Okay, so that's the end of that one, and let's start that again.
Sorry, that's the end of that one.
Okay, so that was game saves and game save mechanics, and
no, it wasn't.
No, I don't think that was game saves.
It wasn't.
No, it wasn't. Was it?
It's classics.
It was. Yeah. Okay. Right, so that concludes our What Defines a Classic segment of this particular podcast, and thanks for watching this one, and tune in to the next part, which will be imminent. Right, guys, well, welcome to the Average Gamer podcast, and this is part 3 of this particular podcast, and now we've got Sully going to talk about Sony's juggernaut.
So Sony and the PlayStation 4 have obviously been carrying on for some time now, very strongly sales-wise, especially in comparison to the Xbox One and obviously than the Wii U. Shh, don't talk about the Wii U. But last quarter, funnily enough, was actually a record-breaking quarter for the PlayStation. And it even beats the PlayStation 2 sales-wise. Now, we knew that the PlayStation 4 was tracking fairly strongly in comparison to the PS2, but I just found it kind of gobsmacking that, with all the competition there is these days for consoles, and before this generation even came out, we're talking about how consoles could be dying and if they're going to have a place in the future, that the PS4 has actually beaten it sales-wise for a quarter. Yeah. And you throw on top of that the fact that the PlayStation 4 and the Pro and the Slim are essentially, unchallenged in 2017. Yes, the Xbox One S is still around, but we know by now that that's not really making a dent in its juggernaut sales. And to throw on top of that, the Xbox exclusives and catalogue of games this year is also quite weak. And another little bullet point to throw in as well is the PlayStation 4 Pro's boost mode, which again increases that console's value proposition.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to gather your thoughts on essentially how you think this year is going to go for Sony, and whether or not you think it will actually end up outpacing the PS2.
I think what's remarkable is the fact that it's outpacing the PS2, because I think a lot of people thought that the PS2 success couldn't be replicated in our current times, because there was generally an assumption that there would be a slow off in terms of like people playing console games because of the fact that there's a lot of different kind of other options for people in terms of like mobile games. I mean, the PS2 didn't have that. The PS2 had very little competition. A lot of the PS2 sales were apparently down to people wanting a cheap DVD drive, and it apparently generated a lot of sales because of that. But I think it's incredible, because I was just reading something recently where it said the sales of the the sales of the PS4 over the holiday period was 6.2 million units sold, which is like a 9% rise on like the same period the previous year. I mean, that's huge.
And when you look at that as well, the rise, yes, the holiday period was in there, like December was in there, which obviously that's a spike every year for consoles. But that quarter also includes the release of the Slim and the Pro as well. So that's kind of what has my interest, is that, well, is this trend going to continue? Like, is the Pro that enticing that it is boosting its sales? And when you look at the PS4 in comparison to the PS2 as well, like you said, the big factor for the PS2 was a cheap DVD drive. yes, the PS4 has a Blu-ray drive, but that's not a selling point in 2017. And it might have been a selling point for the PS3, but certainly not for the PS4. So people are buying this console just for the games, for a gaming console.
Amazing, isn't it? When you give a message that it's all about the game, suddenly people are buying the games and the console. It's quite simple, really.
I knew people who went out at Christmas and bought the PS4 Pro and bought the headset for the VR as well.
Wow, there you go.
And, they've, and these are people who aren't what you would call hardcore gamers. One guy, he likes games and he's had consoles in the past, but he's waited 3 years to buy a console and ummed and ahed about getting an Xbox or a PS4 or whatever. And then the PS4 Pro came out. He's gone out and bought the PS4 Pro and he bought a headset as well. And, they're not the only people I know who've done that.
No.
And add into that as well, you've got people who bought a PS4, like me, who've now gone out and bought the Pro as well. We were all sort of wondering if they'd be able to push very many PS4 Pros before it was released. Well, they've pretty much answered that and then some, haven't they?
Well, they keep increasing its value, really. I mean, with this whole boost mode, I feel like it's the nail in the coffin,
Yeah, I think what they're doing very cleverly is they're building momentum behind the Pro by making it something that's talked about by gamers. They're keeping it as a very hot discussion topic. And I know a lot of people, it's like Joe was saying, his friend bought one. I know a lot of people who are getting the Pro as their first console this generation, or people are upgrading from the PS4 to the PS4 Pro, and I'm possibly going to be one of them soon because I'm strongly considering getting it.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I think
it's the best case scenario for Sony.
Yeah, it is the best, and I think it's a lot of these factors are what's helping him. And obviously the software. I mean, if you look at the software lineup, both existing software lineup and the games coming in this year, very very strong lineup. Horizon Zero Dawn, Persona 5. We've already had Neo, which is an exclusive. PS4 is really going to do very well this year, I think.
This is their strongest lineup since it released, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's incredible, yeah. And I think they're going to position it to the point where before the Scorpio launch, there's going to be so much positive buzz about it. And by then, we'll probably see some extra features rolled into it as well. But with this whole boost mode and all that, by the time the Scorpio actually hits, it'll probably get a price cut. And Microsoft better hope to God that there is a strong visual difference between cross-platform games between the Pro and the Scorpio, or they're going to have an issue selling Scorpios. Because one, the Pro has so much value that's being built into it now with the boost mode, and it's going to be considerably cheaper. It's the budget 4K box, and if there's not that difference on screen, big difference, Microsoft's going to struggle.
If you look at it this way, right, the Pro is what, £349. If you consider this boost mode, effectively they're cutting into the PC market, and they're doing it very cleverly, Sony. This boost mode is almost giving you like PC-like options in a console box, and I think it's that aspect that's really going to tip people who might have considered buying a gaming PC into buying a console.
They have done it well as well. They've done it well as well because you let's be honest. I was thinking about doing a video about this, about the pros of buying a console, because I like my gaming PC. I come from PC gaming, but for me, not having as much time now, I haven't got the time that I used to have to fiddle, and bringing a console out that gives you some of those options, but not giving you the headaches that you get with PC. And okay, let's be honest, the headaches with PC are less now than they were 10 years ago.
They still exist,
but you still do. Yeah. They still are there. I only had this morning, I'm playing Black Mesa, and I'm getting stuttering, so I had to go in and I had to fiddle around I had to go into the console within game and type in some commands and stuff to try and reduce it and all. And these things still exist. And people who say they don't they're either lying, or they're very lucky, or they're an idiot.
Yeah, they're not as knowledgeable to notice what's going on.
Well, maybe, yeah. I think they would have noticed this stutter, though.
Okay.
I think you'd have to...
you have to stop. You have to look at, is it a driver problem? It's like you say, you open the console. Is it... You don't get that with a console.
Exactly. And so giving us this boost mode, what you said just a minute ago, Grant, it kind of gives you some of that taste of the benefits of the PC without having to go out and buy a PC.
That's it. And it's not only that as well, but they've gone, obviously, yes, the Scorpio and all that will be it's not even backwards compatibility anymore. Like, it's the same kind of console, but you could still view it as backwards compatibility, I guess. And Sony have kind of sneakily released this Pro, which, you know, says, hey, you know, get your prettier patched games here. But then they've gone like, fuck backwards compatibility. How about we have the old games on this system and then improve its performance? Like, you generally don't get that with backwards compatibility. Usually it's the other way. You know, it doesn't run as smooth because for whatever reason they were emulating it. And obviously on the Pro it runs, you know, it runs naturally. It's not being emulated. But when you view it, if you were to view it as backwards compatibility, it's impressive.
Well, if you think, just on your point on backwards compatibility, there are actually some games that run worse on, say, Xbox One than they do on the 360 that are backwards compatible. Digital Foundry they did a video on the Xbox One version of Dark Souls has frame skipping on the Xbox One that it doesn't have on the 360. Just as an example, I think backwards compatibility, I think Phil Spencer's putting a lot on it, but I think it's going to become less important over time. Partly because of the point you just made. It's more about the fact that you've got the option to upgrade, you know, the graphics on, you know, with the Pro. Even in Neo on the standard PlayStation, it gives you graphic options in the game. It gives you action mode, which is 60 frames per second, or it says, do you want movie mode, which is 30 frames per second but better graphics, and that's just on the original PS4.
Yeah,
so it's creeping into mainstream PS4 games as well already.
Like I've said before, though, they have to keep that simple.
Yes,
they can't over-egg it. They can't go too far.
Oh, it is very simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I've said it before. I'd like to see Sony release a standard for how all these options work. You know, so it's not, we remove any confusion. You know, you get a 30, you get a 60 FPS option. You know, the two benefits of either option, you know, are clear cut and there's no confusion, and, you know, they could roll in whatever other options they want as long as it was clear and it was a standard, you know.
I think, you know, they've obviously got to do that. I think for instance, people that don't own a console, they might not know what boost mode does, and I think there's going to have to be a bit of education there, maybe. You know, it's all very well gamers, you know, gamers will know what it's about, but, you know, ordinary people might not see the benefit of it.
Never underestimate psychology, though. People see boost mode, they won't need to know what it means. You know,
good point.
It's got a boost.
Yes, good point. Actually, that is true. Yeah,
it's only $100 more, but it boosts.
Yeah,
exactly.
Boost.
Exactly. I mean, you know, we do have to just mention briefly that, you know, all these things, the boost and all this kind of stuff, we will get on the Scorpio as well.
Yeah,
I think you know, I'd be very surprised if we don't, to be honest, especially with Microsoft looking at the PC market as well and trying to push it across the two different markets. The biggest problem I think the Scorpio has is, you mentioned this before, Sully, you know, I think in your video, that it's got sort of 9 months or so head start, or a year's head start by the time it, you know, from the release of the PS4 Pro to the release of Scorpio, unless Scorpio appears early, and I very much doubt that. The other thing there as well is this thing about games, and the only thing I think that Microsoft might have going for it is, if you look at E3 last year, and you look at the way that Microsoft do E3 versus the way Sony do E3, Sony tends to use E3 to announce games that will be coming like next year, the year after, and so on. Microsoft has tended to, certainly last year, announce games that are going to be coming at the end of the year.
Immediate future.
So, yeah, so I think we may well be seeing, you know, a handful at least of games coming for release with the Scorpio, and I think that might help the Scorpio. The Scorpio will need to have that, because if it doesn't have some games coming from E3 moving on, then it is going to really struggle, because if you look at the lineup that we've already got announced for the PS4, you know, it's just game after game after game after game. You know, when they started, you know, the beginning of this generation, there wasn't a great deal to play.
No.
Yeah, it was very slow to start with, yeah.
Yeah, but we've hit that 3 and 4 year development time, haven't we? It's where they tend to release them. Yeah. So now is the peak year, I think, for ownership of a PlayStation. It's a good year for people picking one up, because they've got all these great games that have already come out, but there's going to be a huge amount of like really big titles this year. It's an excellent time to own one.
I was looking at the attach rate as well for the PS4. I was doing a video on this the other day, and yeah, it's 7.51, which is I was surprised actually because the Wii had an attach rate of 7.1, which amazed me.
And the Wii had shovelware as well, cheap shovelware.
Exactly.
I question that.
Shit that people
honestly think that's really dodgy. I don't believe that for the slightest. I'm sorry.
What, for the Wii?
Yeah, I just don't believe it.
I find that hard to believe as well.
I don't know who Nintendo do that. Did they do that study?
I have to say I was really shocked when I read that because I've always thought that the Wii had very bad attach rate and I would bet money on it having a bad attach rate. The PS2 had an attach rate of 6.2 and the article I was reading brought in that, back then we didn't have the sort of indie games that we've got now.
No.
So that, there are more cheaper games that people can buy now, and that will increase the attach rate. But even so, an attach rate of 7.51 at this point in the cycle, it's pretty good.
I looked at my library the other day just to see how many games that I'd either downloaded or purchased. I mean, some of them are PS3 related because it's your PSN account, but it said 76.
I was going to say I would lay any money you like on that our attach rate's a lot higher than the average.
I mean, it's obviously not. It's not. I haven't bought 76. Well, because some of them are PS Plus games, obviously, as well. But it's not surprising the figure is high, is what I'm saying. Because if you're a gamer, you're going to buy more than the average person. But someone who just doesn't play as many games will still has a lot to choose from with the PS4. Because, like you say, there is a lot of shovelware. Let's be honest, it's the same on Xbox. There's a lot of really shitty indie games out there as well, and some people will put a few quid down and buy them because they think they'll take a chance on them. And also, Sony have a lot of sales. In fairness, Microsoft had just had a sale on their store for a change, and but Sony seem to have one every week, and that probably helps the attach rate.
Yeah, definitely.
It's got to, isn't it? Really, if you're going to put a game at a few quid, people are going to take a chance on it.
Well, there's games, and I know, Clay does this as well. There's games out there that I'm interested in. I'm sure you guys do it as well. And I look at them and I think, well, I don't really want to pay full price for this, but I keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
And when I see it in a sale, then I jump on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it just keeps pushing.
So you can't afford everything under the sun, We're only human. No. We only have normal jobs.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Apart from that guy who developed Minecraft, he can afford everything.
That's it, guys. We just got to develop one hit game.
I wonder what his attach rate is.
The other games.
Yeah, that's right.
He's got all the games.
Yeah, he's got all the cash. Just doesn't know what to do with it. You could buy a PlayStation for every room in his house, maybe.
I don't know, buy Microsoft
he
shares or something.
He should play Minecraft. It's a time sink.
Yeah. Apparently. So I've heard. I tried playing it once and it's like a bloody learning a foreign language.
My girlfriend and I like playing it. We get it. I mean, we just like dabbling in it from time to time, building random little underground networks and
it's
cabins.
Cool. Yeah,
it's just fun. It's a fun time passer,
I can see the appeal of it completely. Yeah. It's like Lego, isn't it?
Well, you can see why Microsoft wanted to buy it. It's not just about selling copies. It's all the merchandise and all the publicity and stuff that comes behind it. And it's one of those games that can just be progressively upgraded over time and never die.
Exactly. And I know that Lego are entering the market, finally doing their own version almost of like Minecraft, which will be interesting. But I think it's interesting that Microsoft are effectively, it's one of the exceptions where Microsoft are actually owning a game that's published on PS4 as well. It's just a bit odd. They must sort of think, and to be fair to them, they support it. They support all the versions out there.
A lot of people speculating, the PS4 would never get the updates anymore, but I was like, no,
not at all.
They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't just cut off a platform where people have invested money on it.
Exactly.
Certainly not. Well, Sony have got such a big market share. I mean, they're just cutting off their nose to spite their face, aren't they?
Yeah, and they know that as well. They're smart. They know that it's a big
Most
money.
Of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, Microsoft are funny like that because sometimes they are incredibly smart and they're so savvy when it comes to business, but then every so often they'll do something unbelievably stupid.
A little bit off down the wrong track.
Yeah, we got this multimedia system, multimedia. Oh, you can play games as well.
Only online.
Yeah. And you can wake it up by talking to it. Yeah.
If you want to be offline, we have a product for that. It's called a 360.
Oh, yeah. God, Jesus.
Yeah. I think he's working for Nintendo now, isn't he? Oh, I got it.
Actually, I wonder what good old Don is doing right now. He's probably working for EA or something like that.
Is that Don Matrick?
I think he was, wasn't he, for a while?
Yeah, I thought it was. But I mean, going back to the PS4, I think the future looks very bright. I mean, I don't know if it will overtake the PS2 in terms of sales, because I think the PS2 is like 200 million, wasn't it, in the end, or something stupid?
I don't know if it's that high, but it might have been. Yeah, it depends how long this generation goes for. I mean, if this generation gets cut short because the competition is so fierce, that's time might beat it. But I think you could look at it and go, well, it would have beaten the PS2 if the generation time span allowed it to. Yeah,
the thing is, it's like you say, the generations are almost, becoming a thing in the past. Well, they could well be, is what we're saying. Because of incremental upgrades, it's almost like that model doesn't really apply, does it? So I think you can sort of compare it, but you can't in other ways. But I think, like I said, in the current market, I think it's doing incredibly well, and it will continue to do so this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hope it does.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to episode 9 of the Average Gamer podcast. And Grant, me and Sully will be back in 2 weeks' time. And we'll see you then. Bye.